investigative journalist Ken Klippenstein, who had built his career at outlets like The Nation, Young Turks, and most recently The Intercept, is stepping out on his own.
Klippenstein made the announcement on his X account on Tuesday, linking to a more in-depth explanation on Substack, where he's going, about his move to pursue journalism on his own. Now, as he writes in this post titled "Why I'm Resigning from The Intercept and Starting Something New," Klippenstein writes, quote, "The Intercept has been taken over by suits who have abandoned its founding mission of fearless and adversarial journalism, and I can't continue in an environment where fear of funders is more important than journalism itself." He also says the news media sucks because they do not write for the public, but instead for their sources, industries they cover, and of course, for the wealthy. Here to talk about that and describe what happened with the corporatization of The Intercept leading to his resignation is Ken himself. Welcome to Rising.
Hey guys, great to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you with us. Obviously, I think Glenn Greenwald's departure from The Intercept some years back was an issue that ended up being of tremendous interest to many of our viewers who overlap with The Intercept. Obviously, we featured your journalism a lot. Lee Fong, Glenn, Ryan Grimm helped co-host the show at one point, so we have relied on great work coming out of The Intercept. But you say that you reached an inevitable parting of the ways because of the management culture there. Can you give us more detail?
Yeah, so several months ago, they laid off a huge number of staff in the newsroom. The editor-in-chief, that's prompted the deputy editor to leave, social media editor, managing editor, I mean, the writers, the list goes on. And at that same time, they've been hiring a bevy of management consultants, including C-suite positions. And so I think that really speaks to what their value set and priorities at this point in time are. But that's specific to the business side and the board of directors that runs the nonprofit. I think there are people in the newsroom that want to get back to doing reporting, but under the stifling conditions and the lack of resources that they have and the bureaucracy that has been brought on by the all these business hires, it's become difficult to impossible to do that journalism.
Yeah, literally impossible. You lay out in your Substack a couple cases where a veteran editor that you were working with was stymied by the business side, the management side, stopping you from doing stories that sound pretty textbook Intercept, frankly, the kind of thing that the organization exists to do. You know, national security stories where you have inside reporting, that sort of thing, the thing that made the outlet famous. Can you give more detail there?
Yeah, so I had a story on Jeff Bezos and his decision to lavish a $100 million charity grant to Eva Longoria, the actress and celebrity, as well as Admiral William McRaven, who was he's now the retired former head of the Joint Special Operations Command, the kind of secretive unit within the Pentagon that runs all kinds of commando operations. And so I thought this was kind of like vintage Intercept. I mean, one of its founders, Jeremy Scahill, he wrote an Academy Award-winning documentary called Dirty Wars that dealt with Admiral McRaven, and he wrote a book of the same name. And in addition to that, it's the billionaire, throwing around his influence. Because if you look at a nonprofit that McRaven's wife is on the board of, that nonprofit has ties to Bezos as well. So it just struck me as a kind of circle jerk, frankly, of influence and glad handing. And I mean, it just hit all the notes that made me want to work at The Intercept in the first place, which is, the huge footprint and shadow cast over the society by billionaires and all their resources, national security, something I cover, and the relationship between the two. So I was stunned when I learned that there were problems with it. I didn't think, there are certainly edge cases, and I'm willing to, hear people's concerns out, but this wasn't one of them.
So specifically, Ken, what were you told was the problem with this story?
Well, I wasn't told anything. The general counsel, David Braylow at the company, back-channeled with my editor and sent an email to him, which I published in the Substack resignation post, which I encourage everyone to read in full because I try my best to substantiate and provide specifics so that it wasn't something like what Robbie alluded to off camera, where there are these kind of grievances. Who knows what really happened? I try to really provide the readers with concrete evidence so they could judge for themselves. And so what the email shows is he called the story, quote, naive, And he said that, isn't it normal so basically the point of the story was that $100 million grant that was given to the celebrity admiral and the celebrity actress is the exact same amount of money that the Washington Post, the Bezos-owned Washington Post, lost in the year prior, leading to devastating newsroom cuts. And it just shows the lack of seriousness that this guy has. I mean, he clearly has money to throw around, specifically the exact amount of money that the Washington Post needs. And the Post, love it or hate it, Bezos said that his interest in getting involved in it was not to make money, it was to support the news. And so I think this shows that he's not very serious about that. But so what the general counsel back-channeled with my editor in private, I didn't know any of this. My editor told me about it immediately subsequent to the email and call. An email was that it was naive, and isn't it normal for a businessman to want to make, isn't it normal to want to make these companies solvent, so on and so forth. And then he called my editor privately, and he said that this is something that parallels in some ways our own billionaire donor. Mm-hmm. It was Pierre Omidyar, who's the major contributor to the Intercept. And my editor said, well, that's unfortunate, but I mean that can't influence the story or not. And then the general counsel said, I'm killing the story. He just unilaterally said that. He's not an editor. He said, I mean, there were no legal concerns with the story. It was just editorial concerns. And then my editor, being someone who has a lot of integrity, and is the reason that I chose to work with him at the Intercept and will be working with him at my Substack, said, well, then I'm going to quit because this is unacceptable. And so at that point, the general counsel backed off when we ultimately published it. But he immediately called me. I took contemporaneous notes on the entire incident, and that's reflected in the resignation post.
Yeah, Ken, I do think that's really the explosive part of this story, that because of the perceived conflict of interest with one's own billionaire backer as a news institution, a story that's critiquing this fundamental problem of what it means to have a billionaire backer of a news institution wasn't able to be covered, or there was an effort to kill that story. It's such an important point as we are seeing a lot of media institutions flail absent the stewardship of a billionaire donor. And we talk about this when we critique what's going on transparency-wise at Twitter, Washington Post, or any number of institutions. I wonder if you could help us understand when the Intercept got to this place. Obviously, Pierre Omidyar has been a backer from the beginning, but it does seem like these issues have become exacerbated perhaps as the Intercept has struggled with fundraising separate and apart from Pierre Omidyar.
Yeah, so I mean, the general counsel is not wrong. There are certain features redolent of the Bezos case. Omidyar has ramped down his support for the Intercept, similarly leading to devastating newsroom cuts. But at that point, you can go in one of two directions. You can try to keep, hoping that that Omidyar will give you money and do what you need to do to maximize the chances that happens, or you can try to go off in a direction that's going to grow your small dollar donors and independent donors, which is what I really hope to do at my Substack, so that I never have to be in a situation like this. I mean, by putting this letter out, I realize I'm lighting my career on fire with other outlets like The Intercept. But, I thought it through, and I don't really care that I do that because I never want to be in a situation like that again, where I'm pressured to put concerns of these, anything else other than the journalism over the journalism. And so that's why I took the risk that I did in launching the Substack. And I think I'm hopeful about it too, because I really think there are a lot of people that want news that looks different than what's already out there. I think it's a misconception that, there's just no money for news. Maybe there's no money for this boring, drivel that's written for Washington, that's written for people's sources. I say in the post, if you want to know who the journalism is for, go look at the ads. See the luxury cars they're advertising. Look at the, you can open up the New Yorker, you'll find ads for ExxonMobil. You'll find ads for Charles Schwab investing. That means it's not for you, and they don't particularly hide it. I mean, it's all sitting right there. So I never want to be involved in a situation like that again, because it just feels rotten. I don't know how else to say. As soon as I heard this, I just felt sick about, the direction in which it had gone. And to the extent that I'm sympathetic, they are running out of money. They have had their money ramped down. I mean, they still have a lot of money compared to other newsrooms. I don't think that should be overlooked. So I imagine there's a sense of panic, but none of that justifies, inflecting your coverage.
Well, yeah, and it's where you decide to make cuts. You shared in your Substack post an organization chart for The Intercept that shows all of these senior positions, management positions, chief digital officer, the general counsel, the strategy officer, all these kinds of people, and then a smaller or comparatively small journalism division. Yeah, like I was saying before we started filming the segment, I've worked for a number of media companies. I've seen from both sides the people leaving and having grievances, and the company having grievances, and oftentimes there's a middle ground and there's mutual wrongdoing, and I don't want to just let people trash their employer. But you brought a lot of very specific information to your Substack post. Really explaining the constraints on you from an editorial perspective. And, if the management of The Intercept wants to speak to that, we'd invite them to do so, of course. But
please, I would love for them to tell their side
describe
story.
a really difficult situation. You're not just, what I'm saying is you're not just like smearing them and saying, oh, it was terrible, and not explaining why. The post really does get into some very specific detail.
And the irony is there are people who are still at The Intercept, including Ryan Graham, who've been pretty vocal about their frustrations as well, and their push, as I understand it, to have the management turned over to Ryan and a couple of other editors there, which seems to underline the point that you were making, that there are widespread feelings of discontent at The Intercept, even among people who have stayed there. I did notice, and I wanted to ask you, Ken, about a couple of Intercept staffers that I saw vaguely alluding in tweets to your departure in a frustrated way. One might describe them as subtweets. Some of them seem to defend the general counsel kind of as a human being and as a friend, and felt like he was being characterized unfairly. Some of the sentiment seemed to suggest that there might be it might not be sustainable for everyone to be able to leave The Intercept in the way that you have, and what becomes of journalism if some star writers like yourself are able to hang up their own shingle, but everybody else is still then at the institution less able to, bring in clicks and views and money to the site. I mean, have you seen those, and how would you respond to that sort of pushback?
Yeah, so those were all New York-based writers, which is where the general counsel lives, and you put it exactly right. They're friends with them. And I don't particularly take it personally. I would be in a very difficult situation too if I was friends with somebody and I saw these things. You'll notice none of them dispute any of the specifics laid out in the article. None of them dispute the email. None of them dispute have anything to say about the killing of the article. I imagine it's just people are friends with somebody and want to defend them, and I don't particularly blame them for that. I would encourage people to try to find any sort of specifics in anything what they've in what they've said. But short of that, I kind of get it. I mean, it felt funny for me too, because I've been friendly with the guy for the past 3 or 4 years that I worked there. But that's part of the problem. That's part of I mentioned in my story that I'm leaving Washington. That's part of the problem with media. They become friends with the things that they're covering, and that it's not that they're demons, although maybe some of them are. It's that it's a normal human thing to want to protect the person that you've had developed some affinity for, right? And so I think that's what's happening here.
Well, Ken, we really appreciate you coming on to discuss it more, and please tell our viewers that where they can find your work on Substack, they should subscribe and all that sort of thing, right?
Yep, join the newsletter, kenklippenstein.com.
Terrific. All right, we look forward to having you back to discuss some of your news stories there. More Rising right after this.